So last week, we found out that, or maybe it was actually a little over a week ago, that there's an investigation by the U.S. government that's being opened against J.P. Morgan for hiring the children of top political officials in China, basically as a form of bribery. That's a great way of going into the Chinese market. You hire the kid of a top official, and you get contracts. Incidentally, also a pretty good way of moving around our domestic market as well. But there's a criminal investigation being opened against J.P. Morgan, and the amazing Andrew Ross Sorkin emerged from his CNBC makeup room to write the most obnoxious column he's possibly ever written.
I love to say this every time we talk about Andrew Ross Sorkin. If you're not familiar with Andrew Ross Sorkin, as Michael just mentioned, he is a CNBC host.
New York Times columnist.
He's also a New York Times columnist, and you will recall him for two things now. It used to be just one thing, but there's two things you'll recall him for now. Number one, he went down to check out Occupy Wall Street in October of 2011, when Occupy Wall Street was in full swing in Zuccotti Park in Lower Manhattan, because a head of a bank told him to go check it out. That's why he wrote the article. That's why he checked out a story that's on his beat already, that should be being covered by him to begin with. But he thought to check it out because he had to report back to one of his banker buddies who was worried about it. Hey, Andrew, he said, can you go out and check out what that Occupy Wall Street thing is all about? Is it something we should be worried about here on Wall Street? That's what he wrote in his column, why he went down there. And then number two now, just a few weeks ago, he questioned whether Glenn Greenwald was an actual journalist and whether he should be prosecuted for being a journalist.
He then gave this incredibly disingenuous flip-flop. So anyways, that's Andrew Ross Sorkin. So this investigation's happening against J.P. Morgan for possibly hiring the children of elected officials, of government officials in China as a form of a bribe to break into the Chinese market. And this news was emerging, and Andrew emerged with a really much-needed perspective, because if anything China needs with its central party government and corruption, or if there's anything the United States needs with its massive wealth inequality and stagnant social mobility and corruption on Wall Street, it's a beautiful, robust defense of the children of the super wealthy and a really articulate and heartfelt stand for nepotism. So Andrew Ross Sorkin, writing in the New York Times, basically said, look, what's the problem with hiring the kids of officials in China? They're better for those jobs anyways. And what's wrong with hiring Jamie Rubin's, Wall Street bankers' sons for jobs here, or daughters, but probably mainly sons? They're best at the job. And I'll quote from the column. He's speaking with a friend who's also worked who's worked on Wall Street. Yeah. Interesting who his sources are for why nepotistic hiring should happen on Wall Street. But hiring this is Sorkin. But hiring the sons and daughters of powerful executives and politicians is hardly just the province of banks doing business in China. Of banks doing business in China. It's been a time tested practice in the United States. This has been happening for thousands of years, said Michael J. Driscoll, a former senior trader at Bear Stearns, who now teaches at Adelphi University. Parenthetically, worked out beautifully for Bear, the bank that failed so hard that even the Wall Street Congress and Bush administration wouldn't keep them from their utter oblivion and failure as a banking institution. Who teaches at Adelphi University. Driscoll goes on to say, I have two sons myself, and one's an intern at a major firm. This goes on all the time. Right. This goes on all the time. Sort of why it's a problem. Now, Alex Perrine wrote a great piece showing why, again, the children of the super rich don't get jobs just because they're the best. They get it because they're connected. They get it because they can do free internships. And they also get it, according to some studies, because they have higher rates of narcissism and entitlement, which allow them to succeed in jobs that reward narcissism and entitlement. Now, look, I know people who come from privileged backgrounds who are great at their work. This isn't a blanket statement, obviously, but it's a ludicrous argument to make. And I just want to end this by quoting Kelly Goff, who is writes for The Root, also had a response to this. And she made a couple of great points, and one of which was how pervasive classism is and how acceptable it is as a discourse, because you would never see Andrew Ross Sorkin be able to write this column saying, well, you just hire white people because, they're better. What am I going to do? It's not my fault white people are better at jobs. Not my fault white people are better connected. What are you going to do? And she goes on to say, and this is quoting from Goff, by Mr. Sorkin's logic, people like me whose grandparents were slaves and grandparents picked cotton, parents became the first in their family to attend college after spending years working as a domestic in the segregated South, are simply out of luck. Not because we are bad people, but because other people's parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents had the foresight not to be slaves and live under Jim Crow and other forms of entrenched racial and class inequality. Unlike my ancestors, these enterprising individuals were go-getters and spent their time building up contacts for their kids. And it's so obvious what she's saying, and the problem is that in order to justify the absolutely unsustainable and obscene rates of social inequality, which are killing not just political and civic America, but actually hurting the real robustness of our capitalist and market economy in the long term, you need to come up with demented pseudo-intellectual forms of justification for what anybody can see as a completely unsustainable, irrational, and economically illogical, not to mention morally wrong situation. And that is the job of Andrew Ross Sorkin, to come up with palatable, demented, pseudo-intellectual justifications of incredibly unsustainable, illogical, and stupid situations. And he really outdid himself in this last column. So there it is.